So La Liga is back and Barcelona are sort of back. A 1-0 victory away at Mallorca was crucial, if somewhat lacklustre, but it did give us a chance to look at some of the fringe players, plus a semi-serious tactical concern of mine about this team going forward. As always, if you enjoy this video, please consider giving it a like. I'll be analysing every single one of Barca's games this October, and your support makes a huge difference. So, with my shameless self-promotion out of the way, let's do it! So I may be jumping the gun a little bit with that subtitle, but in my opinion, Barca's defensive options in the absence of Koundé and Araujo are no joke. Both Piqué and Christensen had extremely solid games, albeit in a scenario that suited them well. Mallorca's 5-4-1 is about the most negative we've seen from any opponent this year, and unsurprisingly, it was a system that had to be very direct when it got the chance. With 6'4" Marici at centre forward and wing-backs who are practically itching to cross the ball, you couldn't really ask for a better centre-back pairing than Christensen and Piqué, who are absolutely in their element defending from a wide position. But their box defending was not the main feature of their defensive performance, it was actually the aerial duels outside of the box. I feel like I repeat myself every week, but Barca's pressing game is coming on extremely well, and with the frequency that opposition teams kick long, it's so important to win those 1v1 duels. Without Araujo and against the big target man, Piqué and Christensen were flawless. That's great news for the upcoming game against Inter Milan, who I predicted will be equally reliant on centre forward hold-up play, and I've got a full tactical preview on that game out already, so check that out after this one if you're interested. Now, I understand there's always going to be some concerns about Barca's defence. At times it feels like they're hanging on, or they concede too many big chances that have to be saved by ter Stegen. In fact, Mallorca had a higher XG than Barca in this game, but I just need to take a second to dispel some of those concerns and reassure you that Barca's defensive structure is in a very good place. Not only have Barca conceded the fewest goals in La Liga so far, just one, they've also conceded the lowest XG against and the lowest XT, expected threat, against in La Liga. They generally don't let opponents have chances, and a big reason for that is their dominance of the ball. Barca averaged just over 65% possession, again the highest in the league, and more importantly, their average field tilt, which is a possession stat that only measures touches in the final third, is at 71%. Yep, that's the highest in the league. So while Barca starve opponents of the ball in general, they do even more so in the attacking third, which is one down to Xavi's positional structure and emphasis on control, and two, his philosophy out possession. That high pressure strategy we always talk about isn't just a tool for retrieving the ball, but controlling territory, to keep the ball as far away from your own goal as possible. However, it does mean that on those few occasions where the press doesn't work, Barca look more exposed. The defenders are in 1v1 situations and the opponents have more space to exploit. Here, for example, Kessié and Dembele get their angles wrong and don't cut out the pass between the lines, which completely opens up the pitch for Mallorca to attack. Xavi isn't really bothered about that space being there, the intention is to stop the ball from ever reaching it. It's high risk, high reward, and based on the data, it's very clearly working in Barca's favour so far. If you're a Barcelona fan, you just have to be mentally prepared for some particularly scary moments now and again. If there's a reason to be concerned though, I would suggest it's actually slightly higher up the pitch. So I have to talk a little bit more about the midfield and about our boy Franck Kessié. With a couple more starts under his belt, we're going to take some time to look a little bit closer at Franck Kessié and why his recent cameos have felt a little bit lacking. Part of which I attribute to his skill set and partly to the system around him. So Kessié's role against Mallorca was an interesting one. He was playing very advanced, almost as a second forward at times alongside Lewandowski, tasked mainly with being a runner and a threat in the box. You can see from his heat map here that despite spending a lot of time in Mallorca's half, most of his touches actually came close to the halfway line, and so ultimately he just wasn't generating much of a threat. He's not really the type of player that wants to get on the ball frequently and make things happen in a creative sense, either from deep or between the lines, and that job of just making runs or occupying a centre-back is a bit limited, especially when you're having to break down an extremely deep and compact defence. Really, you need creative players and a fair amount of imagination, and it just doesn't look as though Kessié is that kind of player. On the rare occasions where he had the ball with space and runners ahead of him, he was pretty conservative with his ball use. If we look at the stats, we see a similar story to the last time I talked about him. Against Mallorca, he didn't complete a single pass to Lewandowski, and I double checked the stats this time. Some of his runs were dangerous, and either the pass didn't find him or the link-up wasn't quite precise enough, but generally he just didn't have enough impact. You can't help but compare this to the other interior, who was Xavi, who took on far more creative responsibility and racked up Barca's highest expected threat from passes. Although it was difficult due to Mallorca's shape, Xavi was looking to make things happen between the lines, receiving and turning with purpose and creating some danger. There was an unsurprising change also when Pedri came on for Kessié, who immediately offered more penetration, both with this dagger ball into Rafinha and this run that, yes, he should have made more of. There is, though, a big structural issue at play here, which probably hurt Kessié's performance, especially if we're comparing him to Xavi, and that's Barca's imbalance on the right-hand side. Against Mallorca's 5-4-1, it was natural that the wingers had a difficult game. Tightly marked and doubled up on, it was almost impossible to generate any space. Dembele, as we know, is a very direct dribbler and usually a decisive passer, but we don't see too many tight passing combinations with his interior, and therefore in these situations, his tendency to hold onto the ball meant that he didn't really combine with Kessié at all. In fact, he only completed 2 passes to him. There was also the problem of Balde at right back, and while he was very competent positionally, his tendency to go inside or backwards when receiving the ball meant very little penetration or progression down the right. And part of that is just that he's left-footed and isn't receiving with an ideal body position to progress forward. The fullbacks also have to be creative tools against low blocks, and because of Balde's risk aversion, Kessié had less chance to get involved. There's also, on top of all of that, the factor that Lewandowski much prefers drifting to the left side, providing an extra body there and a little more space for the interior, whereas the right side can be a little more barren. So I'd like to hear what you guys think. Is Kessié just a slightly clunky profile for this team, or did the imbalance in this game just prevent him from showing his quality? Let me know in the comments, because I'd be interested to see what the consensus is. I do also want to talk briefly about Ansu Fati, who got his first start of the season. I think Ansu showed some good signs, despite being perhaps a bit low on confidence. Like Xavi, he was looking to be threatening in that left half space when he could receive on the turn, and from the left flank he was very positive in terms of carrying the ball and taking on his man, which directly opened up space for Lewandowski's incredible goal. Unfortunately, he wasn't successful too often in his dribbling, but usually he was in pretty tight spaces or was just outnumbered. I liked his mentality in this game for sure, but I think he has some levels to go up in terms of quality. I think he has them, and hopefully he'll just get there with time. But with that, we do now need to discuss the deeper reasons why the wingers were so easily outnumbered and subdued in this game, and why Barca lacked any real consistent threat. So let's finally look at one tactical concern about this Barca system going forward, and whether or not it's likely to be rectified. I need to preface this section with 3 important facts. 1, this game came immediately after the international break, and it's normal for a team to lack rhythm. 2, Barca were burdened with injuries, and so had to rely on players short of game time and out of position. And 3, the system Mallorca used is pretty much the hardest to break down in all of football. So when I go on to talk about these problems, there's a good argument that we shouldn't look too deeply into them. But you know me, that's exactly what I love to do. So what I'm talking about here is really a lack of awareness on how to play against a low block, and particularly one that overloads the wide areas. You can see here that Mallorca regularly created these 3v2 or 4v2 situations on the flanks in their favour. This is the zone where Barca usually get the most joy, and by doing this, you force them into doing something slightly different. So what did Barca do differently to try and circumvent this defensive system? Well, nothing. And that's the basis of my concern. Barca continued to circulate the ball, looking for opportunities to switch out into space, but when they did, the space wasn't there, because 5 at the back plus 2 holding midfielders plus 2 wide midfielders allows you to double up on the winger and mark the interiors at very little cost. The pivot is usually free and the fullbacks are usually free, but they're very rarely the creative engines for Barca in the final third. Presented with this conundrum, Xavi's team effectively had no solution, and you can see the evidence for this from the performance of the wingers. There was no alteration to the wingers' game at all, despite so often finding themselves in hopeless situations. Whether it was Dembele or Ansu or Rafinha when he came on, the name of the game was still to face up to your fullback and try to beat them. And thankfully the one time Ansu did was enough, but aside from that moment, this performance felt like trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. Of course, by setting up like this, Mallorca heavily limited themselves offensively, and just the 1 goal scored was sufficient to win the game. But there's a definite feeling that Xavi needs to better prepare his side for these types of situations and ensure his players understand different solutions. And that could be anything from a different system to just giving players slightly different roles. I won't go into possible solutions too deeply here, but I do touch on it in that Inter Milan preview, so check that out if you're interested. It will be the first link in the description, and it sort of serves as a nice follow-up to this video. So what do you guys think? Am I making too much of this given the circumstances, or is it a genuine flaw in the system that other teams might take advantage of in future? Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, subscribe for more of these videos. They're coming after every single game this month. So I'll be seeing you very, very soon. Take it easy.